Welcome to Unlocking the Dream Vision, the secret history of creation. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we will be exploring the mysterious dream vision of Enoch as explored in my book, Unlocking the Dream Vision, the secret history of creation. In this video, we will explore the gods and the creation of man and take our first steps into the dream vision of Enoch. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one, to the mysteries we will explore. Welcome to Unlocking the Dream Vision. In this video, we will explore the gods and the creation of man. And the most ancient myths of humanity, they speak of a time before the gods, a time before the creation of the world by the gods. It was a dark, mysterious, foreboding time that our ancient ancestors could only represent symbolically as a great darkness hanging over the great formless waters of the world. It was out of this vast darkness, this chaos, this time of great mystery, that it is said that the first of the great ancient gods came forth, bringing with them a new order out of the chaos of the formless waters and darkness of the world. Within these most ancient myths, we are told that these first great gods were of enormous size and incredible strength and went far beyond all human comprehension to describe them. Our ancient ancestors could only describe them as great and terrible things, that nothing on earth could withstand their might or will, as if they were the very forces of nature themselves. In many of these ancient myths, we are told that great and horrible monsters came forth with these massive first gods. In some traditions, they come forth at the same time as the first gods, and others, they are the offsprings of the first gods. In many of them, the first gods are locked in an ageless and endless struggle trying to control these powerful monsters. In these ancient myths, it is not until after numerous terrible battles and forgotten wars that the first great gods gain control over these horrible monsters of chaos. After being defeated by the first gods, almost all of these horrible monsters were imprisoned or made to do the bidding of their new masters. In other traditions, the first gods ruled over and controlled these terrible monsters from the very beginning. Remarkably, all the ancient traditions that remember these horrible monsters, they are remembered as having the power of earthquake, volcano, and flood. They could tear at the earth, carve out valleys, raise up mountains, creating rivers, thus shaping the world as they saw fit. In many ways, they almost do seem like they were the very powerful forces of nature that shaped the earth. These first gods, or elder gods as they were often called, were for untold ages supreme in all the universe. Then, for some unknown and long forgotten reason, these elder gods brought forth new gods. In most of these ancient myths that we know of, these younger gods are normally remembered as the first children of the elder gods. These younger gods are then pressed into service for the elder gods. It is often believed that the elder gods were cruel and brutal in their exploitation of their children, forcing them to maintain the workings of all creation. Although the stories are vague, within the ancient Sumerian creation myths, we learn of how this forced service of the younger gods in time leads to them smashing their tools and refusing to work any longer for the mighty elder gods of heaven. This small rebellion then leads to a great uprising and open warfare between the gods. This great uprising of the younger gods results in them overthrowing the elder gods, thus establishing their rule and a new world order upon everything. This overthrow of the elder gods led to a unique problem for the younger gods and their new rule of the universe. For who would provide the service that was needed for creation to run smoothly? Who would take their place in the great order of the universe? The solution to this unique problem was the creation of man. Man would be created in their image. Man would also provide all the labor and service necessary for the younger gods to live as the elder gods had on their labor. In order to ensure that this new man would provide the right labor, the lesser gods of the younger gods would be appointed to watch over and guide them in this new servant called man. In short, humanity was created to be a slave that existed only to serve the will of the gods. The monotheistic religions of the world have always taken great care to overlook this idea that humanity was originally created as a slave race for the gods. But this is one point that all the other ancient creation stories that we know about agree upon, that the primary reason the great gods of heaven created man was to be a slave. The earliest civilization, the ancient Samaritans, have a story that tells of how in the beginning men were turned out and used like bricks in the service of the gods. This shows us that, at least in the very beginning, the earliest civilizations, humanity believed that it had been created for one reason and one reason alone, and that was to be the faithful servant to the gods. Man would provide all that was needed by the gods. Man would tend the fields, mine the ore, shepherd the animals, and live only to serve the will of the mighty host of heaven. These lesser gods of the younger gods that were appointed to watch over this new slave race of humanity are remembered in the book of Enoch as the ever-famous Watchers. Within the book of Enoch in the biblical tradition, these Watchers are also commonly known as the holy angels of God, or heaven. And as we've already touched upon, Enoch commonly referred to them as the host of heaven that were instructed by the Ancient of Days or Most High to watch over and guide humanity. These Watchers will become very important in their own right a bit later in the story, but at this moment it's only necessary to be aware that they are there in the background, watching, guiding, instructing, and more importantly, they are the ones imposing the slavery upon humanity. Within the biblical tradition, the more powerful of these younger gods would be interpreted as the leaders of the other holy angels of God. These leaders are more commonly known as God's more powerful archangels. It would of course mean that the leader of this group of the younger gods would be interpreted as the one true Lord God of the monotheistic religions and of the Bible. This finally brings us to the beginning of our journey into the almost forgotten story of the symbolic dream vision and the great mysteries it holds within its allegory. Our journey begins with the second of the two dream visions of Enoch. We will explore Enoch's first dream vision at a much later point in the story, after we've learned more about the mystical symbolism. Within the second dream vision, we will learn of the symbolic creation of man. This vision begins with Enoch telling his son Methuselah of the second of his two dreams or visions that begins with the symbolic creation of man. And after this I saw another dream, and I will show the whole dream to thee, my son. And Enoch lifted up his voice and spoke to his son Methuselah. To thee, my son, will I speak. Hear my words. Incline thy ear to the dream vision of thy father. Before I took thy mother Idra, I saw in a vision on my bed, and behold, a bull came forth from the earth, and that bull was white. And after it came forth a heifer, and along with this came forth two bulls, one of them black and the other red. And the black bull gored the red one, and pursued him all over the earth. Thereupon I could no longer see that red bull. But that black bull grew, and that heifer went with him. And I saw that many oxen proceeded from him, which resembled and followed him. And that cow, that first one, that went from the presence of that first bull in order to seek that red one, but found him not, and lamented with a great lamentation over him, and sought him. And I looked until that first bull, that white one, came to her and quieted her. And from that time onward she cried no more. After that she bore another white bull, and after him she bore many bulls and black cows. And I saw in my sleep that white bull likewise grow and become a great white bull. And from him proceeded many white bulls, and they resembled him. And they began to beget many white bulls, which resembled them, one following the other, even many. Verses 1 through 10, Book of Enoch, chapter 85. This is obviously a symbolic retelling of the traditional Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel story contained within the book of Genesis. That is clearly using bulls or oxen to represent the first people, but with some noticeable differences. We'll take a closer look at each of these differences one at a time, beginning first with the symbolism of the bull. The symbolism of the bull is one of the best known symbols of the ancient world that is still remembered and heavily used to this day. This ancient symbol of the bull is so important to humanity that it was even immortalized in the stars as the constellation of Taurus, the bull. We, like our ancient ancestors, often think or use this symbol of the bull to represent an animal with a fearless temperament of great strength and raw power. A great beast that is very difficult to tame and to make into a beast of burden. An animal that can still be very dangerous even when subdued, always threatening to break free. It is these qualities that help make the bull a very popular symbol today, with it being used in advertisement, logos for sports, entertainment, and general mass media. In fact, the symbolism of the bull is so common that many people don't even notice it in their day-to-day activities as they go about their lives. This brings us to our first example, the duality of the exoteric and esoteric meaning of the mystical symbolism that the ancient scribes incorporated into the literal story. The traditional symbolic meaning of the bull as a great and powerful animal is the exoteric part for the common person. The esoteric meaning of the symbolism is that it does not actually represent the animal known as a bull, but is actually a symbolic representation of the first men. Not only does it represent the first men, but it also represents the natural qualities of the bull that are reflected within the first men. This is the first secret of the esoteric meaning of the symbol of the bull. It represents the first men, and that these first men were much like bulls in their behavior and temperament. They were strong, they were powerfully built, hard to tame, and generally fearless, even when tamed. This esoteric symbolic representation of the first men as bulls is just the first of numerous symbolic relationships that we will learn about as we journey deeper into the dream vision. This simple understanding that the bull is a symbolic representation of the first men will also provide a much greater understanding of the overall biblical story and mythology in general. We will take a more in-depth look at this symbolism of the bull representing the first men very shortly. But at this early point of the story, the important thing to understand about this mystical animal symbolism is that the bull represents the first men, who were much like the animal in their behavior. The next important aspect we must explore is the first of many differences between the dream vision and the traditional biblical story. Starting with the radical idea that the ones remembered as Cain and Abel were not the sons of Adam and Eve, as we are traditionally told within the book of Genesis. There is even the more radical idea that Eve first had children with the one remembered as Cain and not Adam. Again, this is just the first example of how the biblical story has been obviously changed to fit particular religious messages or ideology. As radical as both these ideas are, they are only the first of many examples of how the dream vision goes against all conventional thinking. These are also just the first of many mysteries we will explore. Understanding these mysteries will provide an incredibly important insight into the ancient past that will challenge both believer and skeptic alike. Not only will it challenge everything you think you know, it will also provide answers to some of the greatest mysteries of the biblical story. Starting with this most famous and possibly best known biblical story of Adam and Eve. As you are very much aware, many people today do not believe that, scientifically speaking, the entire human race could be descended from just two individuals, as spoken of in the book of Genesis. But in this version of the story, contained within the first few verses of the dream vision, radically changes the entire equation. It not only changes the equation, but it actually brings this most ancient of stories into the realm of greater possibility. This is simply because adding an additional person to the mix, or possibly even two, would allow just enough genetic diversity for all of us today to be descended from just a few people. It would also go a long way in explaining a few of the genetic mysteries we carry within ourselves. Many who hear this may be very skeptical that even the addition of an additional person or two into the mix could possibly result in everyone alive today being descended from just 3 or 4 people. However, that would be a grave mistake to assume, because we have a perfect example within the natural world proving that it is possible for an entire species to be descended from only 1 or 2 breeding pairs. We also have our own experience of the few examples of endangered species being brought back from the brink of extinction with an amazingly small number of individuals. A perfect example of this in the natural world is, of course, the cheetah. It is thought to be one of the best examples of a species that may have suffered a near complete population collapse roughly 12,000 years ago. It is possible as little as 1 single breeding pair survived, and the species itself rebounded from it. They encountered what is known as a genetic bottleneck that resulted in them becoming so inbred that genetically all cheetahs are almost identical. The evidence that all cheetahs are so genetically close enough to one another that skin transplants between unrelated animals take without rejection most of the time, which in comparison all other animals, including humans, tend to reject all skin grafts except from themselves or from a twin. This alone indicates that cheetahs had almost identical immune system, whereas all tigers have different patterns of stripes. The leopards have different patterns of spots. All cheetahs have the same pattern of spots. The cheetah alone proves that it is not impossible for a species to create a viable population from just 1 or 2 breeding pair with a low genetic diversity, surviving only through brother to sister, parent to child mating. Also, given the fact that there is just the smallest of genetic differences between all modern humans, then scientifically it is plausible that we may all be descended from a very small group of individuals, much like the cheetah. The primary difference is that if the dream vision is correct, then by having 1 or 2 additional individuals added in, helped humanity avoid many of the genetic problems and diseases that the cheetah currently has. Although we do not have quite as many genetic problems as the humble cheetah does, we still have several genetic problems that creep up that can only be explained by all of us being descended from just a few individuals, as shown in the dream vision. Once you understand that it is not impossible for all of us today to be descended from just a few individuals, then we can take the next step and realize that these first few verses of the dream vision and the creation of the first men also appear to answer one of the greatest medical mysteries of humanity, which is, why does our species have 3 different primary blood types, A, B, and O? At the moment, we will not be examining the Rh negative factor, and we will address that in great detail in a later point. In addition, although you may not understand it at this particular moment, it also helps provide evidence that the dream vision version of events concerning the first men is correct, especially with the addition of the heretical idea that the Red Bull, remembered as Abel, was not in fact murdered, but only chased away or exiled from the others. To begin understanding this first of many heretical ideas, we need to return to the dream vision, where we are told, and that black boar gored the red one and pursued him all over the earth. Thereupon I could no longer see that red bull. This rather unassuming line provides us with the critical piece of information that allows us to speculate that the red bull, who is remembered as Abel in the book of Genesis, was not murdered, but possibly survived. Not only does it appear that he may have survived, but it also seems that he was able to mate with a few of the offspring of the other 2 bulls and the heifer at some point. Although everyone hearing that for the first time is most likely going to reject that idea completely out of hand without so much a second thought. But that would be unwise, because as you will now begin to learn, this highly heretical chain of events appears to be reflected in our different blood types. Because if true, we can speculate that one of the 3 blood types should make up a much smaller percentage of the population when compared to the other 2, which remarkably is exactly what is found within the distribution of blood types in the general population, with type blood O and A making up 89% of the general population and type B making up only 11%. As remarkable as that is, at this point in our journey, the important thing is to focus on and realize that this evidence that the red bull, possibly the line of Abel, was not murdered or killed off by his brother Cain, the black bull. But he did in fact survive, and clearly at some point was able to mate with either one of the many offspring of the other two bulls, or possibly even with the original heifer, remembered as Eve. This allows us to realize that there were in fact two other individuals involved, and that it is highly probable that this most ancient of stories of us being descended from just 4 individuals, 3 males and 1 female, may be correct. There is also the additional factor that the book of Genesis tells us that these first humans had very long lifespans. In Genesis, we are told that Adam, Seth, and the first patriarchs, except for Enoch and Lamech, all lived to be over 900 years old. If these incredibly long lifespans are correct, then it would also help explain how a single female or heifer, Eve, was able to have so many offspring as the dream vision implies. A long lifespan of 900 plus years would greatly aid in helping explain how humanity could be descended from such a small number of people. It also allows us to begin understanding that this version of the creation of the first men, although radically different from anything else you've ever heard before, it does provide an answer to one of the greatest mysteries and one of the oldest arguments of the biblical story, giving us a small bit of information that can only be understood with our modern scientific understanding of genetics. The next unique aspect we will examine is the 3 different colors of the bull. Traditionally, these colors have been interpreted in a fully symbolic fashion within a religious context, with the color white representing moral purity for righteousness, the color red representing blood and being a martyr, and the color black representing sin or corruption. As we've already seen within the dream vision, it is obvious that the first bull, the white one, is Adam, the heifer is Eve, the red bull is Abel, and the black bull is the one remembered as Cain. With this information, it is rather easy to understand the reasoning behind the traditional symbolic interpretations of the colors of the bull when they are put in the context of the biblical account. This traditional interpretation gives us a vastly incomplete understanding of the mystical symbolism. It is also another example of the very common feature of the duality that exists within the mystical symbolism and its use. In this particular case, the colors do not only have the traditional moral interpretation, but they also have a practical and literal meaning. This is the next step towards understanding the mystical animal symbolism, with this example being that the colors of the bulls are just that, the actual colors of the first men, with one being white, one being red, and one being black, which is still more or less reflected in humanity to this day. By realizing this next step in the dual meaning of the mystical symbolism will help provide a greater understanding of the overall larger esoteric story. If we take these colors of the first men at face value, as you will learn shortly and in the next video, it will help in figuring out where some of these events may have occurred by understanding the distribution of ancient human groups. Returning to the biblical story and the dream vision, we are told that the black bull, Cain, kills his brother, the red bull, Abel. After the event of the first murder, the dream vision provides us what almost all will find a rather shocking turn of events, that the heifer, Eve, goes with the black bull, Cain, and that many oxen proceeded from him which resembled and followed him, which again is radically different than the traditional story contained within the book of Genesis. Remarkably, as radical as that idea is, it does answer another of the important mysteries that many a believer and skeptic have asked about this story, of who did Cain marry after he was banished to live in the land of Nod, east of the land of Eden, after murdering his brother Abel. The dream vision provides us with the answer to this mystery. It was Eve, the heifer, that went with the black bull according to the dream vision. This is another example how the biblical story has clearly been altered in some manner to fit a certain particular viewpoint. but keeps to the original theme in some fashion. Because in the biblical story, this mysterious wife of Cain is rather vague. The few verses we do have within the book of Genesis focus more on their offspring than on her or Cain. The Bible is equally vague in the next set of verses that speak of Adam and the birth of Seth, which the biblical account quickly moves on to the genealogy of Seth and his descendants, the legendary first patriarchs, which include Enoch. This is paralleled in the dream vision with the second white bull that the heifer bore after leaving the presence of the black bull. The second white bull that grew to become a great white bull in the dream vision is Seth of the Genesis story, and that who took the place of Abel. The many white bulls that proceeded from him are the first patriarchs spoken of in the Bible in chapter 5 of the book of Genesis. This is where we will pause for a few moments and explore the question of just who these first men were. This is where we will take our first steps into the esoteric knowledge. It's also the first point that not having a long initiation and educational process of ritual and ceremony will work against us. It is also the first point in the story that will not make much sense at first, and that will go against most conventional thinking on the origin of humanity. This is because these first men are the ones we know as Neanderthal. Although this idea goes against conventional thinking of modern science and might sound a bit on the crazy side, as you will now begin to learn, symbolically, it does make sense. It is also something that will become much more believable for many as we go much deeper into the symbolism of the dream vision. If we take a moment and look closer at Neanderthal, we'll find that he does physically fit the symbolic description and idea we have of a bull. Neanderthals were robustly built, and they were extremely strong and powerful their size. The average male was about 5'5", and the average female was about 5 feet tall. On average, they had a body that was generally heavily built with longer collarbones and wider shoulders that sat upon a barrel-shaped rib cage, much larger than modern humans. They also had large kneecaps and their thigh bones being thick and bowed. They had proportionally shorter legs with a longer torso with a longer pelvic area. Physically, Neanderthal would have been perfectly built to be a slave. In addition to the physical differences, Neanderthal also had a larger cranial capacity than modern humans. He had a bigger brain. Male Neanderthals had a cranial capacity that were around 10 to 15% larger than modern humans are. Although Neanderthal had a larger brain than ours, if we look inside the skull at the impressions that are left by the brain on the inside of the skulls, reflecting the folds and wrinkles of the outer brain or cortex, and there is evidence that these folds and wrinkles of the outer cortex are directly related to intelligence of an individual. It simply means that the more folds and wrinkles you have on your outer brain, the more intelligent you are. In the case of Neanderthal, we find that his brain, although larger than ours, appears to have been much less complex than our own. It has been speculated on more than one occasion that Neanderthal would have problems with complex tasks, and he would have had a great difficulty doing them, or they would in fact be beyond his ability to even mentally comprehend them. There are many practical things that Neanderthal would have been very knowledgeable about, but there would have also been numerous things that he would never have been able to understand. For example, reading, writing, and the more abstract thinking of like mathematical reasoning would most likely have been far beyond his intellectual ability to understand. Although there is evidence that he had an idea about the afterlife. The reason this is important is because it allows us to take the step and realize that if ancient Neanderthal had actually encountered a type of technology or machinery that was much more advanced than his simple stone tools, he would probably not been able to mentally comprehend what he was looking at. For example, let's say you had a time machine that allowed you to travel back into time of Neanderthal. And you were able to bring, let's say, a modern armored military vehicle with you, like a Hummer or some other four-wheel vehicle. If you were to show this modern-day armored military vehicle to your average Neanderthal, he would probably interpret it as some type of living creature. Although he would not be able to understand the technology, it would do everything a living animal would do. But at the same time, it would not be like any living animal he knew of. It would make loud, scary noises, it would move in strange ways, it would have glowing eyes, it would appear to eat or drink, and it would appear to sleep when not in use. Not only would it most likely be viewed as a strange type of living creature to Neanderthal, it would also probably scare him half to death the first time he encountered it. If he attacked it with his simple stone weapons, he would quickly find out they would not have much effect on the metal skin, armored glass, or heavy rubber tires. It's not very hard to imagine how this type of machine could then become some powerful beast that could not be killed or was next to impossible to hurt or injure. If this vehicle was outfitted with standard military-style weapon systems like heavy machine guns, a small missile launcher, or even a flamethrower, then this would become an incredibly terrifying, deadly monster that spit death to any that opposed it. It would be the ultimate nightmare for someone like Neanderthal. It would be something that was far beyond his mental ability to even grasp what he was looking at. This allows us to begin an understanding of how Neanderthal might have described such a horrible and deadly beast. He would have described it in the terms that he could understand. Since it was fast and agile, then it would have the feet like a leopard. It had a large and strong body that seemed like a bear. The front grille and headlights would be seen as the face of a man. Any weapon systems mounted on the top would be a horn or horns that spat fire, torches or lamps that spoke death. It made loud noises like a lion roaring. Now very quickly, we now have a great mythological beast with the feet of a leopard, the body of a bear, the face of a man that roared like a lion and had a great horn that sat upon its head, that spat death and gave great power to the beast, which is exactly what is normally described in all the ancient myths, legends, and folklore of these more mysterious living creatures or monsters confronted by our ancient ancestors. This is one of the most important aspects toward understanding the mystical symbolism and its true origin and meaning. When we combine this knowledge of Neanderthal's limited mental capacities with his physical strength, then it's very easy to understand how Neanderthal could have been thought of being like a bull. It also allows us to understand that this would also make him the perfect slave. Physically strong, but mentally limited. A slave that was just smart enough to do the work, would never be intelligent enough to understand why, or more importantly, to question it or the gods that commanded it. Now I know this all may seem a bit much at this point and rather out of place, but these odd little ideas will become very important in the greater esoteric understanding of the rest of the secret story of creation and the understanding of who the gods were to the first men. If we take this new understanding of the creation of man from the Dream Vision, while combining it with the idea that at the very beginning humanity was primarily created as a slave race for the gods, we can begin building a new, more realistic, if highly radical series of events surrounding the creation of these first men. More importantly, it will allow us to establish an entirely new timeline for the biblical and historical events so many are familiar with. This will also allow you to begin understanding for the first time the true meaning behind the mystical symbolism you see every single day around you and the esoteric religion that uses it. Starting with this idea that the first men that are spoken of in the Dream Vision are the ones we call Neanderthal, this allows us to place the creation of the first men at roughly between 200 to 225,000 years ago, when Neanderthal first begins appearing in the fossil record. As we are told in the biblical story and the Dream Vision, the black bull Cain murdered his brother Abel, the red bull. In Genesis, we are provided with a bit more information of the story. When these bulls are first men, being broken into two groups, one white and one black, with Cain, the black bull, being exiled for his crime. We are then told that he dwelt in the land of Nod, somewhere on the east of the land of Eden. Although the true location of the land of Nod and Eden are some of the greatest biblical mysteries, with our new knowledge and understanding of the dream vision, and based upon the known distribution of ancient humanity, we can speculate for the first time with some confidence that the black bull, remembered as Cain, must have settled somewhere in the eastern or northeastern parts of Africa. This would mean that the fossil remains of Neanderthal we find in southern and eastern Europe and parts of the Middle East could possibly be the descendants of that first white bull, Adam, through the line of Seth. If these first men were in fact slaves, this would begin to answer some of the stranger things we have found about the remains of Neanderthal. In these remains, it has been remarked by many experts that numerous Neanderthals have shown a high frequency of fractured and broken bones and injuries that appear comparable to modern-day rodeo professionals and other professionals who have frequent contact with highly combative animals. There are also several remains that show many degenerative diseases that are typically found only in individuals that suffer from nutritional deficiencies. Modern science believes these injuries and nutritional deficiencies were due to the way Neanderthals thought to have possibly hunted. This was by getting very close to the animal, either by ambush or by quietly sneaking up on them and stabbing them from a very close range. This type of ambush hunting would have put Neanderthal at great risk for getting seriously injured or killed by the larger animals of the time that he was hunting. Major injury of just a few individuals in a small group would also severely limit the group's ability to hunt, which could quickly lead to nutritional deficiencies. Interestingly enough, these injuries and nutritional deficiencies can also be equally and easily explained by a slave society. With the Neanderthals that we find with these physical problems could be in fact be exiled or escaped slaves. These people would have had great difficulty living off the land with little to no knowledge of how to survive without the support of society, if they were escaped slaves or exiled. It's easy to imagine the fear of being on the run, always trying to avoid capture with the threat of returning to slavery or even death. These people would have had ample reason to want to hide and not draw any attention to themselves or any others that happened to escape with them or lived with them as they tried to disappear into the vast, endless wilderness. It's also easy to imagine how these individuals would have banded together into small groups, hiding in caves, trying to leave as little to no trace behind. Very similar to what we find today in the fossil record of Neanderthal. This type of existence could also explain the numerous nutritional and degenerative diseases found within many of the remains. When we add the additional information of the dream vision with the biblical story of the exile and punishment of Cain into this idea, we can easily imagine how the crime of Cain murdering his brother might have led to his line being more exploited and oppressed by the line of Adam and Seth. We can also begin to understand that the traditional murder of Abel contained with the book of Genesis is most likely a misinterpretation of the red bull being exiled or banished. This misunderstanding appears to have its origin in the fact that we in the modern world have tended to forget that it was common in the ancient world for the people of a community to view the exiled or banished person as being dead. This is because they would normally never be seen again by the community, for banishment typically meant death for the individual without the support of society. It was also common for people to think and view that the person or group of people that forced the exile or banishment upon an innocent person as being a killer or even a murderer. Hence, we can understand our modern misinterpretation of the possible exile as the actual physical murder of Abel as described in Genesis. In our next video, we will explore the most famous and popular story of the entire dream vision and the biblical tradition, the fall of Lucifer and his fellow angels. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos.